welcome to week 6 of distance learning. This week we're going to go over the required documents for the course, which might pop up on the AP exam, and really this week's emphasis is to review over Unit 1. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Cue the intro. Alright, so we are inching closer and closer to the AP exam, which, in case you forgot, is May 11th at 4 p.m. So the first thing I want you to do this week, after you get done watching this video, is to go over your Unit 1 outlines. That's about Chapter 1 through 3. Feel free to start looking ahead to Unit 2 if you want, but this week we're going to focus on reviewing Unit 1 of the AP curriculum. After you've refreshed yourself on that and you've looked over the feedback I've given you on the previous week's FRQs, then I want you to play GimKit. That's right, our favorite platform to review on. This is the Unit 1 review that you took before you took the Unit 1 exam way back at the beginning of the school year. So it's got about 30 questions on it. I'm not grading it for accuracy, but I want you to play it just to get yourself familiar with the types of questions you might be asked regarding Unit 1. While I'm not grading it for accuracy, you guys will still technically be competing against each other just over the course of the week. So try to beat one another. I have no idea if there's still power-ups on the game where you can attack one another, but if there is, you should totally try it. The next thing I want you to do is an Edpuzzle that reviews all of the foundational documents that you'll need to know for the exam. The other Edpuzzle I want you to do this week is review over Unit 1. There's a lot of questions in there, but again, I'm trying to expose you to this content, refresh your memory, and give you more practice with it. And as we've done each week, there's 2 practice FRQs for you to do, 1 scenario application FRQ, and 1 argumentative essay FRQ. Make sure you get that and everything else done, as always, by Friday night at 11:59. Now, if you feel really confident in your knowledge of the documents, you can go ahead and stop this video and get started on your assignments for the week. But if you feel like you'd really benefit from me going over things one more time and then hearing it again this week and just getting a lot of repetition on the required documents, for the next part of the video here, I'm going to go through each document, give you a brief overview of it, what it's talking about, what it's arguing, and then also give you a quick way to remember those documents. Start with the Declaration of Independence. I know you all are pretty familiar with it. Just remember it's a breakup letter from the United States to Great Britain. And the other big thing you want to get out of it is it really emphasizes one of the big principles of government that we learn about, and that's the idea of natural rights. The idea that you are born with certain rights because you are a human being or because God gave them to you. The other caveat with that, government does not give you rights. I said that at the beginning of the year, and I emphasize it again now. Government does not give you rights. Government either chooses to protect those rights or they choose to violate those rights. After we declared our independence, we had to create some sort of system of government in the colonies that now became states, and they created the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was basically where every state acted almost like its own independent country. There was a high degree of state sovereignty, and the central government was really restricted. There was no executive, there wasn't really much of a judiciary at all, and Congress could not tax, they could not raise an army, they could not regulate interstate commerce. And so the states had those powers. As I had mentioned before, things like Shays' Rebellion and economic woes after the war kind of caused some people to doubt how well the Articles of Confederation could really respond to national issues. So then they decided they would try to amend the Articles of Confederation and create a stronger, more powerful central government that could more efficiently deal with these issues. And they came up with the Constitution. Enter the Constitution. Now, I'm not going to go over the entire Constitution for you. Hopefully you remember some of the Bill of Rights and some of the other amendments we went over. Make sure you take a look at those and refresh yourself. But there are some clauses I do want to remind you about. For example, the Interstate Commerce Clause. Remember, that clause gave Congress the power to regulate commerce or business that was going between the states. Now, over time, that Interstate Commerce Clause has been interpreted by the judicial branch to give Congress a lot more power. They can now regulate anything that even affects interstate commerce, which has really enlarged the size and power of the federal government and Congress's ability to regulate different things. So that's one important clause to know. The other one is the necessary and proper clause. And that's where Congress can pass a law doing something that may not actually be explicitly written in the Constitution, but they can do it because it's necessary for them to carry out one of their other powers. So the most common example I give is Congress can create a new branch of the military because they have the power in the Constitution to maintain an army and navy. Even though it doesn't say anything about an air force or a space force, Congress could still pass a law because it's necessary and proper for them to carry out their function of maintaining the military to protect the nation. So make sure you know those two clauses and you're familiar with kind of the history and how they've given Congress more power over time, especially over the state governments. I'm sure I don't need to remind you that not everyone was on board with this Constitution. There were some people that were not big fans of it. So there was a battle between two groups of people. Federalists who did support the Constitution and Anti-Federalists who wanted to keep the Articles of Confederation or maybe at least just amend them a little bit. Instead of fighting each other to the death or having a battle on Twitter, they decided to write arguments in essays that they published in newspapers. One of the most notable ones was Federalist Number 10. Federalist Number 10 talks about factions, and a faction is basically a group of people with a similar idea or a similar set of opinions. The Federalists were really scared of one dominant faction bullying all the other minority factions around and trampling on their rights. They referred to this as the tyranny of the majority. Now, James Madison, the author of Federalist 10, basically said, hey, listen, factions are inevitable. There's no way we can absolutely get rid of them, but there is a way that we can control their effects. Let's have more of them. You see, Madison believed if we had a large republic, then there would be more factions. And if there's more factions, they will all try to fight each other and counteract each other's ambition to dominate. And so it would be almost impossible for one faction to dominate if there's a lot of different factions competing to get to the top of government. Unfortunately, this could cause gridlock. But if your goal is limited government, then this is perfect that no one ever gets anything done and they're constantly in gridlock because it means government isn't growing in size and power unless everyone really agrees that they should do something. I've often used the crab in a bucket mentality to kind of show you an example of this, of where ambition counteracts ambition, as Madison says. If you ever look at a bucket of crabs, the moment one of them tries to escape out of the bucket, he's pulled back down by the other ones. And it's a really strange phenomenon, but it's kind of what Madison's hinting at. The more crabs you put in the bucket and the bigger the bucket is, the more likely they'll pull each other down so that not one crab gets out and dominates, so to speak. Yeah, some people have said the best way to remember Federalist Number 10 is that Federalist 10 deals with faction. If that works for you, good. If not, sorry. You might have to come up with another way to remember that one. But that's all I got. In Federalist Number 51, the emphasis is on separation of powers and checks and balances. The argument here is that separation of powers and checks and balances should be enough to prevent government from becoming tyrannical and getting too much power. There's also an argument against needing a Bill of Rights. The idea was, hey, government will be able to regulate itself. Please excuse my wife. She shot me in the back of the head with a Nerf gun. I just got John Wilkes Boothed. Joke's on her, though. She doesn't realize she left me in the room with this. Anyway, one way I've heard to remember Federalist 51 is that Federalist 51 makes sure there's not one branch that has all the power. Federalist Number 70 emphasizes the importance of having one single executive and an executive that's pretty powerful as well. Hamilton writes this one and basically argues there should be a single executive because if you had multiple executives or multiple presidents like Ben Franklin had proposed, then it would be hard for the public to figure out who to blame or who to even heap praise on depending on their government's actions. It'd be hard to keep people accountable when you don't really know who's responsible for what or who actually made the decision.
Any organization thrives when it has two leaders. Go ahead, name a country that doesn't have two presidents. A boat that set sail without two captains. Where would Catholicism be without the popes?
Hamilton's basically saying it's a heck of a lot easier for one person to make the decision on their own and follow through on that as opposed to a whole group of people who might have different opinions and find themselves in gridlock, not being able to accomplish anything. And as Hip Hughes says, where attention goes, energy flows. And that's true of the executive as well. Way to remember this one, Federalist Number 70 deals with the presidency. Federalist Number 78 talks about the judiciary and mentions that judges should be independent. They should be insulated from politics because their job is to judge the Constitution, not run for re-election, which is also why it emphasizes that judges have life terms and they're not up for re-election. And that makes sense because when you run for election, you find yourself sometimes in a position where you want to promise people something in order for them to vote for you. However, that's not the role of a judge. A way to remember Federalist Number 78, 7, 8, 9. There's 9 judges on the Supreme Court. Federalist 7D8. 789. Hopefully that makes sense. But how could we forget about the Anti-Federalists here? One of the main Anti-Federalist papers that were written that kind of goes against Federalist number 10 is Brutus number 1. Brutus number 1 argues that a large republic is a horrible idea because the bigger the republic is, the more factions there are, and government, first of all, is not going to be able to get anything done. Secondly, how is it really fair that people in California are having a say in what laws are implemented in Ohio, when they're very different people sometimes? Instead, Brutus argues that smaller republics are better because they're more representative of the people. Think about it. In a state government or even a county government, usually those governments are more representative of the people because the people are more similar in a sense. Brutus also argues that a smaller republic is better because those governments are more efficient. Because there's fewer factions competing, it's easier to get things done than in a large republic. So Brutus 1 really does not like the idea of a strong centralized executive that can take away sovereignty from the states and bully them around. A way to remember Brutus number 1? Well, for those of you that remember the story of Julius Caesar, Brutus is one of the men who famously assassinates Caesar because Brutus, along with some other Roman senators and politicians, are worried that Caesar is getting too tyrannical, that he's centralizing too much power and becoming almost like a king, which is exactly what Brutus and the Anti-Federalists feared the new presidency was going to be like. So it's not really a coincidence then that the Anti-Federalists named this paper Brutus. Last required document is a letter from Birmingham jail, which was written by Martin Luther King Jr. after he was arrested in Alabama. In that letter, Martin Luther King Jr. really emphasizes civil disobedience, peaceful protests, and also kind of criticizes the white moderates that weren't really acting. And he was being rebuked by the white clergymen who are saying, hey, listen, we need to fight segregation through the courts and through the legislative process. Whereas, on the other hand, Martin Luther King Jr. is saying, no, we need to use direct action. We need sit-ins. We need civil disobedience. We need to bring people's attention to the issue of segregation and force them to take a side on it because this is a moral issue and we need to make it more of a moral issue by taking direct action. So that's kind of the gist of a letter from Birmingham jail. I don't know if this one will actually be on the AP exam, but it's still possible and worth going over. I encourage you to keep studying for the exam. Use resources you find on YouTube or on the College Board's website or anywhere else because that exam will be here before you know it. Now, if you need help with anything this week, in Google Classroom at the very top, you should see a link, or if you have the app, it should be a little camera icon. You can schedule a time with me if you want. Just shoot me an email or give me a comment in Google Classroom for me to sit and talk with you one-on-one through the webcam, and we can simply talk about whatever you need help with. So that is an option for you this week and in the subsequent weeks as well. So as always, let me know if you need anything, and good luck this week.